All right, this is lecture 8.1. We're going to focus on the pectoral girdle, which is the clavicle and the scapula, and then we're going to take a look at the upper limb. So that's got a lot going on. So I'm going to get right started. Appendicular skeleton is basically the majority of the bones of our body. So over 50% of the bones are in the appendicular skeleton. And it's primarily our two girdles, pectoral and pelvic, and then our limbs, our upper and our lower limbs. So you can see the overview. This is the first picture in your packet. It kind of walks you through, gives you some numbers that go along with them as well, just so you can get a feel for appendicular skeleton numbers too. So we're going to start by looking at the pectoral girdle. And as I mentioned before, each girdle will contain one clavicle and one scapula, aka a collarbone and a shoulder blade. And the primary purpose of these bones are to allow for attachment for shoulder muscles. Okay, so your two collarbones are these kind of curved S-shaped bones, all right, that are flat, and they sit perched one sternal end connecting to the clavicular notch on the manubrium of the sternum, and then one acromial end that is going to attach to the acromion, which is a portion of the scapula. All you need to know for clavicle is to be able to identify this bone as the clavicle, aka the collarbone. Your shoulder blades, on the other hand, have a few markings that we do want you to know, and they are listed all in there. So you are looking at the anterior view. The anterior view of a scapula is the smooth fossa side, and the posterior side has this very large marking called the spine, and that is a marking that you do need to know. Two other markings that we are drawing your attention to is this flat putty-like structure on the top or superior portion. It is one of the highest points of the scapula. It's called the acromion, and that's going to provide some attachment points for several ligaments and muscles that form our shoulder joint. The other marking that's up here that we want you to be able to identify is this fossa. It's called the glenoid cavity or glenoid fossa, and this is where the head of the humerus forms what is called the ball and socket joint of the shoulder, or the glenohumeral joint. Then you have, in addition to the spine, you have three borders that you are required to identify on the scapula. So you have a superior border here, obviously at the top. You have a medial border here on the long side, and then you have a lateral border. So when I look at a scapula to figure out right or left, I want to put the spine posterior, and I want the glenoid cavity to articulate with one of my humeruses. So if I were to put this on my left side as if it sat on the back of my left, this would mean that's got to articulate with my humerus here, and that's exactly where this goes. So your acromion and your glenoid cavity are going to face laterally. Your medial or vertebral border is going to be on the medial side, all right? And that is your scapula or your shoulder blade. Several views that you'll be able to take a look at. The big portion of our lecture today is focusing on our upper limb, and there is quite a bit going on, as you can see there. We have our brachial region, which consists of the humerus. We have two bones that make up the forearm. That would be the ulna and the radius. And then we have a plethora of bones that are going to make up the hand that we'll walk through. So you have phalanges, you have metacarpals, and then you have the carpals. Okay, so let's get started by looking at the humerus. Again, I'm going to kind of cheat and look at the highlighted markings that we'll be taking a look at. So that's an example of the humerus. I have one here as well. A couple identifying features to start. This rounded surface here is referred to as the head. And it has two necks. You're not responsible for knowing them, but you have a surgical neck, or excuse me, an anatomical neck on an angle, and a surgical neck like if you were going to strangle somebody. On that head, you are going to have these two bumps. All right, I'm going to put that really close to the camera there. You have two bumps, and those are called the tubercles. And so the one that's higher up is called the greater tubercle, and the one that is lower is called the lesser tubercle. All right, so higher, greater tubercle, lower, lesser tubercle. All right, what other pieces here on the top? Nothing on the top. All right, everything else that we're going to take a look at on the humerus is going to be on the distal end. So this is the proximal end that would be located up here, articulating with my shoulder blade. And then our distal end is going to have several different markings that you need to be familiar with. So Taking a look here, you have a couple of structures on the anterior side to identify. And I would say the first one that I usually look for is this kind of sloping portion, and that's called the medial epicondyle. You can see that here as well. Epicondyles are attachment points for muscles or ligaments, tendons or ligaments. And obviously, we're going to have several that will be located in our arm for those upper arm muscles, and then the muscles that go into our forearm. So you have a medial epicondyle, therefore the opposite side has a lateral epicondyle. But the medial one is very pronounced, and so that's the one that is noticeable. Then you'll notice that on that distal side, you have these this smooth kind of circular surface on the lateral side, and you have this kind of sharp angle portion on the medial side. The smooth surface that's on the lateral side is called the capitulum, and the sharp angled surface that is on the medial side or on the lateral side is the capitulum, and on the medial side is the trochlea, right? And these two structures essentially are going to help to form part of the what is referred to as the hinge of your elbow, all right, joint. And so again, capitulum is located on that lateral side by the lateral condyle, and then the trochlea is located on the medial side by the medial condyle, right? Then you've got a couple of fossas. So you have these little depressions that are in there. The one that's on the medial side is called the coronoid fossa, and the one that is on the lateral side is called the radial fossa, all right? And that's because the radius is going to be on the thumb side, which is going to be the lateral bone of the forearm there, okay? So again, on that medial side, you have the coronoid fossa, and then on the lateral side, you have the radial fossa because that's where your radius will be. If we go to the posterior side, as we can see here, you have a very large singular fossa, all right? And that's going to be your identifying feature to find the posterior side of the humerus is this very large fossa, and that's called the olecranon or the olecranon fossa. And that is the articulating point for the olecranon or the olecranon, and that is the hook of the ulna, which is this, which we'll take a look at momentarily, okay? So I think that's your only one on the posterior side. It is. So everything else is primarily identified on the anterior side for the humerus. And again, you have a right and a left of these. To identify right and left, the head and the medial epicondyle have to be facing medial. So I know this one is my right. Okay. All right. As we make our way down, we're going to take a look at some of the two forearm bones, and that is going to be your radius and your ulna, and they are going to form your articulating points with the humerus are going to form your elbow joint. So you can see here, this is what we refer to as our elbow, that olecranon or olecranon of the ulna, and then the ability for us to kind of turn our forearm over is done by this head of the radius that kind of looks like a golf tee that we'll take a look at as well. So let's take a look at those two bones here. They're usually studied together. There we go. All right, so there is our posterior view of the radius and the ulna. Just kind of scanning through what I want to make sure you know here. So they are a pair, right? They're your two bones of your forearm. They are connected, as you can see here in the middle, but by this interosseous membrane, so between bone tissue membrane, and it keeps them kind of together as a pair. Not to mention there are many notches that provide for attachments to keep these two connected as this kind of team that's going to work together, right? But we're going to talk about them separately first. So this is your ulna. Your ulna has the hook, the olecranon or the olecranon, and that's kind of a U shape. So lets you know you're looking at the ulna. The ulna is on the medial side or the pinky side. So whichever arm you are looking at, your ulna is always going to be on that pinky side when we are in anatomical position. So your olecranon here is located in that spot. You have this smooth surface here that is called the radial notch. So that allows for this head of the radius to kind of sit very nicely here and then do this kind of pivot. All right. And that allows us essentially to play basketball, to tell us we're feeling so-so, and a lot of other movements that our forearm provides for us. Okay. All All right, so we have radial notch. You also have, let's just flip us here for a second. You also have what's referred to as the trochlear notch. So we need to have this little bend or notch so that the olecranon can attach into the trochlea of our humerus and attach there and kind of hook and form our elbow. So that is our trochlear notch. You also have what's referred to as the head of the ulna, and that's located on the side that has this little styloid process. Okay, so olecranon or olecranon, the curly part, where you hook my finger in, where it hooks in to the humerus, is the trochlear notch. You have the radial notch of the ulna, and then you have the head of the ulna that has the little styloid process. All right, and this is the distal end, and this is the proximal end of an ulna. Then you have your radius. Let's flip back here. All right, so you have your radius. What we have down here is going to be the ulnar notch. All right, so on the distal end of the radius, you have a smooth surface here, and that's going to be the ulnar notch. So that's what allows to have the ulna connect to the radius on that distal end. All right, so you have that here. You have the styloid process of the radius as well. On the proximal end, you have this large bump that's called the radial tuberosity. Tuberosities are usually big extending bumps. And then you have the head. The head looks like a golf tee. All right, and again, that's going to articulate with that radial notch of the ulna, and that's going to allow for that pivoting motion, all right, providing that spin. There is a nice little ligament that's going to wrap around the head of the radius that allows it to kind of pivot in place, which is great. And again, we can see that here, the head, the radial tuberosity, and again, that ulnar notch located there. So those are the two bones of your forearm, right? All right, last but not least, because there's a lot going on there, you can see the rest of your third column consists of the bones that make up your hand. Your hand has 8 carpal bones. That's these bones right here. All right. You have metacarpals that are located here, and then you have these phalanges. Okay. So let us take a look here at the wrist. So the one thing that you always want to figure out is which hand are you looking at? So there's 2 things that I always look for, all right? One is the thumb, all right? Obviously, I can always line up my thumb with my hand. So I have to figure out if this is my left hand or if this is my right hand. So I can find my thumb. And then the other thing I look for is this tiny little bone that's in the shape of a P, and that's called the pisiform bone. And the pisiform bone is on the anterior side. So if this is my thumb and this is my anterior side, the only hand this could be is my right hand, all right? Thumb, pisiform on the anterior side, all right? So this is my right hand. And once I know that, then I can kind of make my way through and identify these carpal, metacarpals, and phalanges. So your thumb, these 2 bones here, all right, are referred to as the pollex. All right, and it only has 2 phalanges, but that is our word or anatomical term for the thumb. And that's the pollex. You could see that here. It only has a proximal and a distal, and I'll talk about those phalanges at the end. The reason being that I mentioned that first is because I start at the thumb when I am memorizing or talking about my carpal bones. All right, there are 8 of them, and they're tiny, and so you want to come up with some type of mnemonic to help you remember them. So taking a look, let's go to that anterior view there. So here's our pollex. So coming down from our pollex here, the first one I come into contact with is our trapezium. All right, so I have pollex, I have my traps, so I have the trapezium, I have the trapezoid, and then I have cap and ham, all right, or the capitate and the hamate bones. So those are my distal 4 bones of the carpus. So I have pollex, trapezium, trapezoid, capitate, hamate. All right, those 4 there. And then if I go back to start, so if I go back to the thumb line, I now have what's referred to as the scaphoid, the lunate, here, my triquetrum, and my pisiform. All right, so these bones here, scaphoid, lunate, triquetrum, and pisiform. So you'll notice here, scaphoid, lunate, triquetrum, pisiform. You'll notice that the triquetrum and the pisiform are kind of connected or appear that way. The pisiform kind of sits off of the triquetrum. And so just keep in mind that those are two separate bones. So again, if I am memorizing and talking about my carpal bones, I go pollux, zeum, and zoid, consume ham, smelly legumes, and tasty pie. So that's my mnemonic that I say: pollux, zeum, and zoid, consume ham, smelly legumes, and tasty pie. Pollux, trapezium, trapezoid, capitate, hamate, scaphoid, lunate, triquetrum, pisiform. All right. There are many different acronyms. Those of you taking athletic training may have a different one in there about Sally and going to the party. So we'll talk about a few more in class, but you want to come up with one that's going to take you through your bones of the carpus. Again, starting at the thumb, there's your pollux, you have the trapezium, the trapezoid, the capitate, and the hamate. The hamate's got the hook, your scaphoid, your lunate, your triquetrum, and then your pisiform. Right? So those are your carpal bones. Then you have 5 metacarpal bones, and they are numbered 1 through 5 based on thumb to pinky. So this would be metacarpal 1, metacarpal 2, metacarpal 3, 4, and 5. So when you label or identify them, you always say which metacarpal it is by number, right? And those are the bones that make up your palm. And then lastly, you have phalanges. All right, this is your Regina Phalange Friends moment. You have phalanges. You have proximal phalanges for each digit. So you have a proximal, obviously we're missing them on the middle finger, proximal. So this is your proximal phalange of the second digit. This would be the proximal phalange of the 4th digit, and so on. On your thumb, you only have a proximal and a distal, but notice on 2, 3, 4, and 5, you have a middle phalange. So this would be the middle phalange of the 2nd, the middle phalange of the 3rd, the middle phalange of the 4th, and of the 5th. And then you have a distal phalange on all of your digits, okay? There are some videos to help you study and learn these bones of the hand, because I would say they are the most time-consuming for students. So please make sure you spend some time with those.